The CEO laughed when she saw the single dad standing in the airport lounge wearing an old brown jacket with faded cuffs and shoes that had clearly survived more winters than they should have. She looked at him, then at the expensive travelers around him, and quietly joked that someone like him probably belonged at the airport cleaning windows, not sitting among executives. What she didn't know was that the man she had just humiliated had once commanded the same kind of respect she had spent years trying to earn. And 3 minutes later, when the pilot walked into the lounge and saw him, the entire room went silent. Daniel Carter had learned long ago that poverty could change the way strangers looked at you. At 38, he was a single father raising his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, after losing his wife to an illness that had left a hole in their home that never seemed to close. Daniel worked wherever he could find honest work, repaired old appliances during the week, drove delivery trucks when extra money was needed, and sometimes fixed broken machines late into the night, while Lily slept in the tiny apartment they called home. His clothes were old because every extra dollar went toward his daughter's school, medicine, food, and the small things that made her smile. He never complained. He had learned that being a father meant carrying your pain quietly when your child needed you to be strong. That morning, Daniel and Lily were at the airport because Lily had won a scholarship to attend a special science program in another city. It was the opportunity Daniel had dreamed about for her, but the flight had been delayed, and they were directed to a premium lounge because of a temporary airline arrangement. Daniel felt uncomfortable among businessmen wearing tailored suits and watches worth more than everything inside his apartment. Lily, however, was fascinated by the airplanes visible through the glass windows. She pressed her little hands against the glass and watched them taxi across the runway with wide, hopeful eyes. Daniel smiled at her, even though he knew their trip had already stretched his budget to the limit. Then Victoria Sterling entered the lounge. She was the 35-year-old CEO of Sterling Aviation Technologies, a woman known for her sharp decisions, expensive taste, and intimidating presence. She had built her company from a small engineering firm into an international aviation business, and success had taught her to judge people quickly. Her eyes landed on Daniel, and the worn jacket immediately caught her attention. She glanced at Lily, then at Daniel's battered shoes, and made a sarcastic remark about how the airline must have started offering charity seating to its premium customers. A few people laughed nervously. Daniel lowered his eyes, not because he was ashamed, but because Lily was watching him. He knew how quickly a child could absorb humiliation. He simply put his arm around her shoulders and told her that some people had expensive clothes but still had very little kindness. Victoria heard him and smirked, assuming he was trying to make himself feel better. She had no idea that those simple words would stay with her for the rest of the day. If you believe that kindness matters more than money, that people deserve second chances, and that we should never judge someone by their appearance, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs this message, and subscribe to SoulTales for more emotional stories about kindness, family, and second chances. A few minutes later, an announcement came over the airport speakers. The flight crew had requested assistance because the aircraft had developed an unexpected technical problem before departure. Passengers were asked to remain calm while engineers inspected the aircraft. Victoria immediately became impatient. She had an important business meeting that evening and demanded to know why the flight was delayed. Daniel remained quiet while Lily continued looking through the glass. Then something unexpected happened. The aircraft's captain suddenly entered the lounge instead of remaining with the engineering team. His expression changed the moment he saw Daniel. He stopped walking, stared at him for several seconds, and then hurried across the room with an expression that none of the passengers understood. The pilot was Captain Michael Reeves, one of the most respected senior pilots in the aviation industry. He walked directly toward Daniel, completely ignoring the executives around him. Before anyone could understand what was happening, Michael reached Daniel and embraced him like a brother he had not seen in years. Daniel looked embarrassed and gently stepped back, but Michael's eyes were already filled with emotion. He told everyone that Daniel Carter was not an ordinary mechanic or delivery driver. Years earlier, Daniel had been one of the most talented aviation engineers in the country. He had designed a critical emergency system that had prevented a catastrophic accident during a test flight. He had also trained dozens of young pilots and engineers, including Michael himself. Daniel had been offered senior positions with major aviation companies, but after his wife became seriously ill, he walked away from his career to care for her and later raise Lily alone. Victoria's face slowly lost its confidence. Michael explained that Daniel had once been known throughout the industry as the engineer who could solve problems others considered impossible. He had never cared about titles or expensive clothes. When Daniel's wife became sick, he sold his luxury car, moved into a smaller home, and eventually sold almost everything valuable he owned to pay for her treatment. After she passed away, he refused several offers that would have required him to move away from Lily. The room became painfully quiet. Victoria looked at Daniel's old jacket again, but this time she saw something completely different. She realized the faded cuffs were not evidence of failure. They were evidence of sacrifice. The worn shoes were not proof that he had fallen behind in life. They were proof that every dollar had gone somewhere more important than himself. Then Michael revealed one more secret. The aircraft's technical problem was related to a system Daniel himself had helped design years earlier. The engineers had been unable to identify the exact cause. Michael asked Daniel if he would take a look. Daniel hesitated, glancing at Lily. She smiled and encouraged him with a small nod. He walked onto the aircraft with the engineering team, examined the system, and within minutes identified a minor but dangerous fault that had been overlooked. He explained the repair step by step, and the engineers followed his instructions. Less than an hour later, the aircraft was cleared for departure. Victoria watched Daniel walk back into the lounge carrying Lily's little backpack. She approached him, but for the first time in her life, she did not know what to say. The woman who had mocked his clothes now stood in front of a man whose character was far greater than anything she had measured by appearance. She apologized sincerely. Daniel accepted it, but he did not use the moment to make her feel smaller. Instead, he told her that everyone makes mistakes, but what matters is whether we have the courage to recognize them. Victoria looked at Lily and then back at Daniel. Something inside her had changed. Before boarding, Victoria offered Daniel a senior engineering position at her company, but Daniel initially refused because he could not leave Lily or disrupt her life. Victoria then made a different offer. She created a flexible consulting position that allowed Daniel to work from home and bring his expertise back into aviation without sacrificing his role as a father. For the first time in years, Daniel felt that perhaps his career had not ended. Maybe it had simply been waiting for the right moment to begin again. Months later, Daniel stood in a modern conference room surrounded by engineers who respected him, while Lily proudly watched from the back of the room during his first major presentation. He was still wearing simple clothes. He still preferred repairing old things instead of replacing them. And he still carried the same battered wallet his wife had given him years earlier. But now, whenever someone asked who Daniel Carter was, people did not talk about his old jacket. They talked about the father who sacrificed a career for the woman he loved, the man who raised his daughter with dignity, the engineer who saved lives, and the person who had every reason to become bitter but chose kindness instead. Victoria never forgot that airport lounge. She later admitted that the most expensive lesson of her life had cost her nothing but a few careless words. If this story touched your heart, please support the video by liking it, sharing it with someone who needs a reminder not to judge others, and subscribing to SoulTales. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need hope on a difficult day. And before we end, comment. Kindness sees beyond appearances. If you believe a person's worth should never be measured by their clothes, money, or social status. Because sometimes, the person wearing the oldest clothes in the room is carrying the richest story. Daniel had lost his career, his home, and the woman he loved, but he never lost his heart. And in the end, that was the one thing no amount of money could ever buy.